Born from humble beginnings, Ron Peterson emerged with a PhD in physics to play a role in many important scientific discoveries and became a key executive in Honeywell, one of America's largest corporations. Along the way, he worked with Nobel Prize winners, testy bosses, altruists, and people hanging on the edge of society, learning from each of them. An Introvert Learns to Fly is an often humorous memoir chock full of life lessons from us all. Ron, thanks for joining me on Right on Radio.
Thanks a lot, Josh. I appreciate the opportunity.
While reading Introvert Learns to Fly, you mentioned that your father recommended you go to barber school if the whole science thing doesn't work out. Did he ever change his mind about what he said to you?
I think so. He died in about 1982, and I'd been a scientist, and actually I got promoted a couple of times by then. So I think he had given up on the idea. Also, it would have been a horrible idea because that was just about when the people stopped cutting their hair. Back when I started going to school, there was a lot of, that was sort of the hippie era, and I probably would have starved to death if I followed this advice.
Did you ever contemplate a hippie lifestyle at all?
I must not. Maybe I was just too busy. It was kind of, I tended to agree with the politics of it all, but it was, and I didn't really like the idea of the war very much, but it was, I wasn't going to, wear flowers in my hair and go off. And it was, I think in the book, you probably read the part where I was in the basement laboratories doing my experiments while there were riots outside at the University of Illinois. And they had curfews, so I ended up sleeping on an air mattress underneath my desk, probably for weeks on end. So I didn't have to violate any of the, because I would have had to walk about eight blocks home, and there's a lot of police out there, and it could have been dangerous. So mostly I was just trying to get things done. It's kind of been true my whole life. Just do as much useful stuff as you can in the time you've got.
You also talk about in the book, too, how a superpower of yours that's maybe sometimes been both an advantage and disadvantage is that you can become extremely focused on a subject matter where you can kind of lose track of reality around you. Is that partially what we think was a symptom of that?
For sure. I was so dedicated to getting a PhD ever since some kids in high school said that no one from our high school ever got a PhD. It was sort of like it became a must. I think it's also why I'm able to write books, because most normal people would say, I'm not going to spend a year and a half writing something, which may or may not be even useful. And but when I get on a project, I kind of like to, it's a big advantage to be able to focus like that, to learn things. But it also means people around me are wondering what I'm up to,
You told me recently you had an interest in biochemistry and genetics while reading The Codebreaker by Walter Isaacson. What led you to your interest in becoming a scientist?
Well, that's an evolutionary process. I think when I was in grade school, I learned that I was really pretty good in math. Father put me on display whenever anybody came over. And I did some things which surprised teachers. And I think when I hit the 8th grade, when I finally was in a school where all the rich schools kind of came together at middle school, I got the highest score on a math test, and it was like, what? Maybe I am good at this. So that was part of it. And I started building a telescope, and I got some teachers who really encouraged me, way beyond, what teachers are supposed to do. I think in 9th grade, we had to say what we wanted to be, and I put down teacher, engineer, or scientist. And then I studied to see which ones made the most money and things like that. And so by the time I was in high school, I either wanted to be a world-class high jumper or a scientist. So somewhere along the line, that decision was kind of made, whether that was plausible. With my father saying, this can't work. He had never heard of somebody in the family being a scientist. So it was, it's been kind of a challenge and an adventure the whole time, going to college and graduate school. I didn't really have any tutors or people who were examples for me to follow. It was like everything was an adventure. Everything was a discovery, which I kind of liked, but it also meant it was.
I think gives permission to and take risks where otherwise you had examples before you to base off your decision making you would not do otherwise. So I definitely get that.
Yeah.
Outside of science, what other professions did you ever think about pursuing?
Being a teacher was certainly a natural. I loved doing that when I was in graduate school. And I suppose becoming a professor and being research and teaching would have been ideal. But I really like teaching people. Yeah, that's why I'm teaching my grandchildren now.
What about teaching do you like? Is it just connecting with people about a subject matter that you share a common interest in?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's like when I discover something, I want to tell other people. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it's because I want them to know that I know it or what, but I think if you in the book you see, I had tons of fun in graduate school. I literally tried to make sure all the class passed the tests, and I used to throw liquid air on the class if they seemed to be dozing off, just to wake them up. And you can be very creative as a teacher. That would have worked out fine too.
I like this anecdote you shared in the book about there was a young woman who I believe your focus was for people are going to become nurses or doctors, and she said she'd never gotten less than an A in her life, and she was struggling in your class, and then you're nice enough to talk with her, come outside class, and more like just give her emotional support, I think, and to come back in and have confidence in her abilities.
Yeah. There was a gal who got a C, and she had never, and so she ran out of the class crying, and for a while I didn't know what to do. It's like, should I just let her go or whatever? And eventually I just told the class to hang in there, and I went out and sat on a bench and talked to her for a while. For me, those classes were sort of a one-on-one thing because I was tutoring almost everybody. And you're right, they were all pre-med or pre-nursing. And that class was set up to screen out the people who didn't deserve that. Mm-hmm. And so they all knew that was a class you had to pass. And I tried to teach it in a way so that they could all pass the tests, and make it as fun as possible.
Who are some of your heroes in science?
Well, I've always tried to have a heroes list, and some people drop in and out. I noticed you suggested Heisenberg. I had seen a movie where the idea was that he actually slowed down the Nazi program to develop an atomic bomb, and he came across as sort of a hero, and I would have added him to my list. But there's also a lot of people who say that wasn't quite true, and that and he didn't deserve the credit, that he just goofed up and slowed it down by making errors. But yeah, I can't remember who I put on my list. John Bardeen, who was a double Nobel Prize winner, he was on my advisory committee for graduate school. I held in a lot of esteem. He had helped invent the transistor, and then he developed a theory for superfluidity. About a year after I got the Nobel Prize, about a year after I got to Illinois, and I actually spent a couple hours with him talking about projects and research that he co-authored with us in the whole thing. He was such a quiet and he was the kind of person anybody could come and talk to for an hour, even a first-year graduate student. The other extreme is, of course, Richard Feynman, who was like the definition of charisma. And I think I mentioned to you, when he would walk into a room, he couldn't just walk into a room. As soon as he opened the door, you knew he was coming, because he's waving his arms and he's shouting at some imaginary friend, and that's the way he taught. The classes that they were just totally engaging, and I guess that shows that you can have different personalities and be a scientist, which is good to know.
You got into Caltech, and you had the opportunity to take a graduate course with Feynman on quantum electrodynamics, and In the book, you said you had a confrontation with him, and I was wondering if you could talk about that. It was an issue of your grade, I believe. You asked to switch it to a pass-fail. Is that correct?
Not quite. It was actually it happened was that there was this long line of students on the final day that you could drop the class. And I was at the end of this line, and all these people were chemistry students and different majors. And he kept, as they came up to him, he kept saying, "No, I'm not going to sign your drop slip. Be brave, young man," is what he kept repeating. And finally, I got there, and as a physics major, I thought, "Yikes, I'm in real trouble." And basically, I just said, "Hey, I'm taking 3 other physics courses. I'm working for this professor on the side, and I just can't do your course justice." And he said, "Oh, okay." And so he signed the drop card for me, which was unfortunate because he did make it a pass-fail class the next Monday. And I ended up going to all the classes anyway, so I could have gotten a pass. He was kind of a frightening person to walk right up and talk to. I mean, I guess he wouldn't have said that, but he's like regarded as one of the, the 10 best scientists of the 20th century, I think.
Ron, I was shocked. You got into a fight with someone in grad school?
Well, there are times when I can be stubborn. There was a chair, a big easy chair facing a TV in our living room at grad school, where 3 of us lived in the same house. And this one really big, I like to call him a rude Chicago guy. And I've had a couple confrontations with rude Chicago guys. One was at an airport where this guy with a Cadillac kept trying to cut me off as we were going to an exit at an airport thing. And I'm driving my 13-year-old Cougar with basically plasticized walls because it rusted out so much. And I just thought, you have far more to lose on this than I do. So I just kept edging ahead, and eventually the guy gave up. But the guy in our house where we were staying in grad school came back from something, and he saw me sitting in what he considered his chair right in front of the TV. And he tried to drag me out of there, and I was resisting. And we got into a pushing match and broke a lamp and some other things. But it didn't get into, actually punching or anything.
Okay. You refer to yourself as an odd vice president of one of the largest corporations in the U.S. Besides being a self-made introvert, what made you peculiar as a vice president at Honeywell? And I was talk about that, but I also want to know, in comparison to yourself, what were the other personalities like among the executives?
Well, as you can imagine, most vice presidents tend to be very outgoing. There's a reason they got to their positions. When a couple of occasions come to mind when we would have parties with all the general managers. At the beginning, there were only 3 of us who had spouses who were still working. And for Miriam and I, that seemed like a normal thing to do. But out of the 80 VPs or something that were there was only 3 of us, and including 5 women whose husbands had stopped working. So it was kind of like, this is our job, is to do this. And eventually those 2 other people who were also from different research centers, also their spouses quit. So Miriam and I became the only ones. So that makes us a bit odd. The fact that I respected Miriam enough to know that her job as a teacher, she's a high school Spanish teacher, was as important for our family as my job. The other time was once we were at a meeting, and they went around the room with a bunch of general managers and asked, "What would you do if we suddenly gave you $100,000? And in that room, every single person named something that they would buy. And when they got to me, I said, "I'd just put it in the bank." Everybody kind of gave me a strange look, like, "What? That's not why we're here. We're here to make so much money that we can spend it." And I mean, also, when we'd go on trips to India or places like that, everybody else, or Japan, they had to come back with a whole string of pearls, that 2 or 3,000. They had to be willing. It was almost like a competition to see who could spend the most. And that was not, it just wasn't a priority for me. So that's the way I'm thinking. I'm a little bit odd. I mean, all the way through my career, I thought that the only way I would get ahead was if I did things which were remarkable. I had to get more business. I had to solve more problems. I had to do better research. And I didn't actually compete to get ahead. It was more like I had to prove that before there was an opening.
I watched your video clip from the Context Conference, and at the very end, I don't remember what the gentleman's name is. I don't think they said in the video, but you told him, I guess he shared a story of how you told him one point, you wake up every morning and wonder how I'm going to impact the world. And I came across a quote actually from Thomas Jefferson saying that he saw himself as someone who was more interested in the dreams of the future than the history of the past. And it reminded me of you. I was curious if you saw yourself in that way.
Yeah, that's probably the case. I mean, it was a bit of an overstatement when he said that I woke up every morning thinking my only job was to change the world. Because, I mean, but to be honest, that was a consideration when I decided to become a scientist. Because especially in high school, I'm still kind of introverted, and it was like, okay, how can I have a real impact on the world? It's not going to be by becoming a politician and so the only thing that made sense to me was I knew that scientists, if they're successful, can invent something or come up with an idea, which once the idea happens, the world is changed. You know, it's a way to change the world without, having to brag about it. You just do it. You make something happen. And so, yeah, that is kind of my focus. Clearly, my writing about the future all the time. And if you go to my website, the only thing on there is, I think that every single email I send out about my business says, okay, here's news from the future. It's just the way I think. I mean, that's my thing. It's, and the other problem is that I don't have a great memory. I never could have been a doctor or a lawyer because just too much memorization. It's just, those are things which are backward looking, I think. And they require too much remembering too many things.
Okay. Now this sparks a question for me. So I'm curious, how do you describe your thought process? If you examine your own thought process as it's happening, is it holistic? Do you feel like you're using all your brain to arrive at one point that is a synthesis of everything almost like you realize the answer, I guess, in a way? Is that how you would visualize or kind of explain how you think?
It's interesting you should say that, because it's like if you were to talk about how I wrote the book, the novel, so where do ideas come from? It's I think you're right. It's kind of holistic. But when I was writing the book, I would go out for long walks and with a general question of something about the next chapter, and then ideas would pop in. It happens a lot in the morning when I wake up or when I'm taking a shower or something. I'll get an idea. I think it's all of my subconscious is coming up with, especially when it came to writing a book about a science fiction novel. You have to have a way of pulling things out. You can also learn from reading other people's stuff and then extrapolating that. And that's what I did. I would just jump on an idea and figure out how to make it exciting. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I don't really know where my ideas come from all the time.
No, I think you gave a great response. I think for a lot of people that's the case. It's a point where you're not really having fixed or focused attention on anything, so you can just let your mind wander. Now, So you were called a futurist of Honeywell, but I know you're also called Dr. Quack. I was wondering if you could talk about where that title came from.
Oh, that's a good one. Incidentally, my Twitter handle is Quacky2000, by the way.
I saw that, yeah.
So it's something that stuck with me. I think I used to visit San Francisco a lot with my supervisor, Henry Marr, and we would always go to Chinatown. We'd eat out at the restaurants, and after a couple of these occasions, we would be going there quite often, or to Monterey or whatever. And he convinced me I had to bring back a frozen duck. And I really liked duck because I had tried it. And so I always would have a frozen duck in my briefcase or carrying that back. And one time I got back into the Honeywell building. There was this long, long hallway, maybe 2 blocks long in one of the buildings. And I'm walking in there, and I came across a few people from our group that knew me, and I pull out the duck and said, "You want to see my duck?" Which was kind of random, but and after that I was known as Dr. Quack, and it sort of was fun because so I started putting little ducks and things in my office, and when I got promoted to director or manager, there was a giant cake. One for 200 people because it was a big party. And there was a picture of Donald Duck on there saying, "Congratulations, Dr. Quack." So it kind of stuck after that.
I think my last question for you is kind of a tough one. You mentioned the difficulty of accepting your son-in-law's decision to become Catholic due to his, I'm going to quote you here, his long history and clarity about his positions. How did you, Ron, reconcile your faith with your background as a scientist?
Yeah, in the book, I kind of waited till the end of the book because it seems like a question that as a scientist that I had to at least address in the book. When I was at Caltech, that was kind of atheist central for universities. It was like that was the accepted point of view, was that they're, believing in any sort of God was a mistake. It was, let me do a slight aside here. I think that one thing that's interesting is I think that human ability to see things which aren't there is one of our greatest strengths and weaknesses. It's kind of like my ability to work too long on things. But when I work with my grandchildren, I point out that, okay, you can't actually see an atom. You can't see an electron. Those things are there. And I go through and try to show them how it was proved that they were really there through experiments. But the point is that being able to see things beyond through telescopes that aren't visible to the human eye is one of the greatest strengths that humans have. On the other hand, it causes people to believe in all sorts of crazy things, like not getting vaccinated now and other things, which, because everybody has the ability to dream and to see things beyond where they are. And we kind of say that's okay to be able to do that. So I tend to think that the scientific method is needed. So there's a reason why you can believe in something which you can't see. But it's sort of the central conundrum on religion or non-religion. And I tried to address it in the book by just saying that I didn't really have a good answer, that I understood the arguments of my roommates and friends. I have tons of Jewish friends at Caltech, and there's a lot of different points of view. And I think I eventually said in the book, hey, I could argue that there is a God, and I've done that at our church. And given the 7 different reasons why I think that's likely. But I could also argue with the other 7 reasons why that's probably not correct. And I could argue with myself on these things. So I came down in the book by just saying, hey, I'm agnostic. I don't know. I can't prove it to anybody that they're wrong. because people just don't listen. So, but given that I don't know if there's a correct answer, and maybe because of my age, people who are older tend to be more church going and so on. For all those reasons, I've chosen to believe to have faith that in some Christian ideals, and there's a lot of other positives of that, like having a whole huge community of people who are friends and take care of one another. And at least at our church, it's a place that's very multicultural, and we try to help everybody. It's kind of the reason why I started the Rice Street Gardens. It's because I wanted to help people. So from that point of view, I think it's really very useful. But I'm, like I say, I couldn't really argue and convince other people one way or the other, because I'm too confused myself about the subject. I don't know if that answers. I think one of the things I learned at Caltech, as I said, is that the professors, especially Feynman, would say you can believe in things or not believe in things, but the scientific method where things are repeatable is a better way to go. And whatever you do, you shouldn't believe something just because some high-minded person, somebody with authority, says this is what's true. That if you start believing in an authoritative person or church, or then that's the worst thing you can do as a scientist, because the Galileo story, and there's a ton of other ones which can kind of support that. But it's kind of I don't know. So I argue with myself on this too all the time. Every time people are praying at church, I'm thinking about things like this.
This is my time with Ron Peterson talking about his memoir, An Introvert Learns to Fly, a memoir of timidity, panic, science, leadership, and love. Ron, it's been a delight having you. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Thank you. It's been interesting.
Now this.